On today's episode of Blatantly Honest with Makaila Nichols, I spoke with Sarah Turney. At age 12, her sister Alyssa went missing and is still an open missing persons case. Now, at age 31, Sarah is demanding justice for her sister. Her father is the only person of interest in Alyssa's disappearance. He was arrested in 2017 for hiding 26 pipe bombs, but is now a free man. Sarah is dedicated to getting justice for her sister and has a podcast called Voices for Justice that is climbing the charts and ruffling authorities' feathers. All right, Sarah, let's get blatantly honest. I would really love for everyone listening to understand your story and Alyssa's story. So before we dig deep, would you mind telling the listeners that don't know your background just the gist of who you are and what you're going through?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Sarah Turney. I've been fighting for my sister Alyssa Turney for, the past 3 or 4 years or so. Essentially, she went, missing in 2001. I was led to believe that the perpetrator of the case would be prosecuted. They told me that would not happen, and they advised me to get media coverage. So that's why I've been fighting for these last, 3 or 4 years or so. And yeah, it's been a crazy, wild ride, and the story is very, very complicated, but that's extremely high level. I'm just fighting for my sister, Alyssa Turney, to get justice.
I'm so sorry you have to do that. I can't imagine. I'm an only child, so when I saw your story, I was like, I need to reach out to her and I need to try to help you in whatever way I can to get justice for your sister. I think maybe let's start at the very beginning. So tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah. If you would have asked me about my childhood a few years ago, I would have said it was great. We didn't grow up with a ton of money, so that's always a challenge. But I have a lot of good memories there. For the most of me and Alyssa's life, it was just me, Alyssa, and our father. Essentially, our mother passed away in 1993, so that's really the only life I ever knew. Alyssa spent, honestly, so much time raising me. But I didn't know that really until I look back on it. So as an adult, when I reflect back, I see something very different, of course. I was given a lot of freedom as a child. As an 8-year-old, my father would come into my bedroom every day and say, "Do you want to go to school today?" And
Wow.
as an 8-year-old, you go, "No, that's okay. Like, I'm good on that today," or
I
whatever. I
feel
don't
like
need to
it.
learn about Lincoln. So yeah, I thought I was extremely spoiled. But when you look back, it definitely is more in the realm of neglect. And more importantly, I learned that Alyssa and I were treated completely differently. Alyssa is, 4 years older than me, and our father was just, so strict with her compared to me. She was, of course, expected to go to school every day. He would help her with her homework every day. He wanted to know where she was going with who and, when, which isn't the most terrible thing in the world. But when you combine that with him videotaping her, pretty constantly, as well as monitoring a lot of her conversations, and then going into even weirder things, like she was made to sign contracts stating that she had never been abused physically or sexually by our father. Just all
Wow.
these really weird things, yeah, that I had no idea about. So it's like night and day.
When all this was going on, did that kind of create like a buffer between you guys? Almost like you kind of had this freedom and she didn't? Did she ever bring that up with you?
Of course, yeah. I would say that's mostly what we fought about, just like any siblings, right? Why do you get to do that and I don't get to do that? So yeah, we fought a lot. It was very much, I was like, why does dad care so much about you and not about me? You're the favorite. And of course, which is crazy to say because she was being abused and I really wasn't. And she would look at me and say, why do you get so much freedom? You're the favorite child. What are you talking about? So yeah, of course, it created a ton of contention between me and Alyssa.
Were you guys really close? Or were
We
you kind of more batting heads?
it was kind of both, right?
Yeah.
When I look back on it, I imagine that's very much what a mother-daughter relationship looks like is, I want to go to school wearing this and showing my stomach or whatever. And she's saying, absolutely not. Go back to your bedroom and change. I'm not letting you out of the house like that.
Of
And I'm like,
course.
you're the worst. You know what I mean? You're the meanest and the worst, and I hate you. So it's weird because we were so close. And of course, we had all these tender moments of doing hair and nails and her dressing me up and us experiencing things together. So it's kind of both, is what I really say. We fought so much, but I think that's just kind of, because of the circumstance.
Definitely. What is your all-time favorite memory of your sister?
It's so hard to say. And I go back and forth on it all the time. I think, one of the best, nicer memories of me and Alyssa was, right before she left, she finally started letting me hang out with her. At this point, I'm 12 and she's 17, and I'm just becoming cool, if you will, which means I'm not going to like tattle on her for
Yep.
dumb stuff. You know what I mean? So, she finally let me take the city bus with her to the mall with my friends and her friends. And it's like
Wow.
maybe the most like uneventful memory ever, but for me it was like just this indication of what was to come, and I felt like I was finally accepted into the cool kids club. We went and got pretzels together or whatever, and she didn't totally hate my friends, and it was so fun. I felt like I was finally becoming cool, and it was a moment in which we could just kind of be kids together, and she wasn't really mothering me. We were just genuinely hanging out as friends. So yeah, that was probably my best memory at this moment that I can recall.
Auntie Anne's, was it? The
Yeah, of
pretzel?
course, of course.
Yeah, Auntie Anne's I feel like brings everyone together, definitely. So when you're 12 years old and I'm 22, so like 10 years ago, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
You're fine. I'm 31.
31. Okay. So 10 years ago, I can barely remember what it's like being 12, but at 12 your sister goes missing. How did you process that? You were so young.
Yeah, I used to think that I processed it very well. But what happened was that first summer that Alyssa went missing, I actually slept in her bed every single night. I didn't really know what to do. At the time, I don't think my mind went to the place of concern. I think my mind went to, it's fine, she'll be back. I just miss her. And
Mhm.
so I would, yeah, like I said, sleep in her bed every single night. I would, wear her makeup and her jewelry, and I started wearing her clothes. And that summer, I really started acting out. Before that, I had, done what a lot of 12-year-olds do that I can't recommend 12-year-olds do, but I would smoke cigarettes or whatever and think I was super cool. But that escalated into, smoking pot and, drinking alcohol and things like that, which was really extreme for me at 12 because I always said I would never do that. I saw this, contention between my father and Alyssa in terms of her experimenting like a normal teenager does. And I always thought that was really bad. So everything kind of changed that summer, but I don't think I processed how serious it was right away. I really thought that she would be back.
Ugh, I can't imagine what that must have felt like, and then turning to substance and stuff to kind of almost cope in a way. Where your peers and classmates, I assume you were still in school, how did they treat you because of this?
We didn't really talk about it, as crazy as it is now because I scream it to the world, but back then nobody really brought it up. I think people just thought it was a sad thing that they felt uncomfortable talking about. There were only a few moments in my life that I can recall when I was a teenager that I really expressed my sadness about Alyssa too. I think I didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to bring it up. It was kind of this like unwritten thing. And
Mhm.
I ended up going to the same high school as Alyssa, and it's not as if her teachers were bringing it up or there was some type of memorial or anything like that. It was as if everybody forgot.
Ugh, how did that make you feel, just like your sister had been forgotten?
At that time, I don't think I was able to process it. Like I would write about it all the time, but it's hard. I don't think it was till I got older and I saw what, these schools typically do for kids who go missing or get lost or murdered or whatever, that I realized it was pretty abnormal, that schools usually address these things. They usually memorialize them in some way. But as a teenager, again, I don't think I noticed, and I think that's because I was trying to run away from it every aspect I could.
Mhm. Definitely seems that way. Now, how was your father behaving when all this was going on?
Yeah, so I mean, it appeared to the family that he was doing everything he could for Alyssa. He always had flyers on the dashboard of his truck. He was always telling people about her story and how she went missing. And that was also wrapped into his own life story. It kind of became this evolution of him being this guy who always told his life story. This was just who he was, right? So you're at the grocery store or whatever, and you're like, shut up about your job 30 years ago. Like this poor cashier doesn't care,
Yeah.
and that evolved into telling the story of Alyssa. So he talked about it constantly, But what I later found out as an adult was, the way he reported her missing was not the way concerned parents do. And, in fact, the police department had to reach out to him more than once via postcard to get the most current phone number on file for him. So while we thought he was doing everything he could, it turns out that he wasn't, and he was not keeping in contact with the police or updating them.
A postcard. That was how they contacted him. Oh
Yep,
my God.
I know.
Wow. That's nuts. Yeah, that's like the snail mail.
Yeah, I mean they had nothing on record for him. They didn't know how to reach him, so all they had was an address and sent a postcard and said, "Please call us. We, want to talk to you about your daughter."
Yeah. So I watched on some of your TikTok videos where you talk about Alyssa and her story, some of the home videos. There was one where she said, Sarah, dad's a pervert. When she said that, I mean, you're so young, and I don't know if you knew what that word meant. I mean, looking back at that, were you like, oh my God, or did it just kind of roll off your back?
I mean, at the time, I think I had no idea what she meant. When I look back, Alyssa was over sexualized for her age, in my opinion. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but Saturday Night Live used to have a skit with Will Ferrell and I think it was Sherry O'Terry where they would do like this cheerleader skit and they would say, sex can wait, masturbate. And when I was about that age,
Yep.
Alyssa made me go up to our father and say that, you know what I mean? And I had no idea what that meant, but she did.
Yeah.
And she knew what the word pervert meant. And so I think it really points to her being over sexualized, but I had no idea in that video. And I found it just by chance. I was going through digitizing these videos. I wasn't even about to make a podcast or going through them for that reason. I was just taking them from VHS tapes to DVD and, in digital or whatnot. And I saw the clip and I remember like I screenshotted it on my phone. I start recording on my phone to
Uh-huh.
like a real monitor for the computer. And I sent it to a few of my friends and I was like, what is this? Like, what is this? And people were like, oh my gosh, this is insane. You need to tell the police. You need to put it online. You need to share
Oh
this.
my
So
God.
yeah, I was like, how in the world did this exist? And it's not even in the police record. So I was astounded.
Wow. So you were just finding more evidence, if you will, against your father.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to the police with it, they basically said there's nothing we can do with this. We can't even use it in court, which I've been told by other experts that that's completely not true, that it is something they could use in court because it just adds to the overall case and the
Mhm.
story. It just helps paint this picture of what was really going on. But yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, it's extremely damning. It's not a joke. Throughout this entire home video, there's things leading up to this. It's a camping trip, and essentially, the whole time Alyssa's pretty upset, and of course, we don't know why. But she's constantly trying to get away from our father. She's out like climbing very high rocks, jumping rock to rock, just kind of this behavior that you would expect from a child acting out, and from a child who is fearless. And you have to ask, why is this kid so fearless? Why is she so defiant against our father? It's not, in my opinion, what I've seen with normal children acting with their parents.
Did you ever have any of those uncomfortable experiences with your father, or was it mainly just your sister, like you mentioned?
No, it was just Alyssa. I was spoiled rotten and I
Mm.
was very outspoken against my father. If I wanted something, I told him. Like I was, for lack of a better word, I was pretty much a brat
Yeah.
because I was given everything I ever asked for with him, essentially. I mean, again, we didn't have a ton of money, so it didn't go into, I don't know, Porsches and, high-end electronics and things like that. But in terms of
Yeah.
like, where are you going to be tonight? I could be like, none of your business, bye. And that would be fine.
Yeah. So, what advice do you have for someone who, for other kids out there who may or may not be getting abused by their parents? What would you say to those kids that might be listening?
Of course. Yeah. And this does come up a lot. And I always want to say, first and foremost, be safe. You know what I mean? Be
Mhm.
aware of your surroundings and think of different scenarios that might happen if you do tell. Because I do, of course, encourage you to get help. I encourage you to not stay in the cycle of abuse, to not feel family pressure. If you are being abused and someone tells you if you come forward, it's going to destroy the family, please know that that weight is not on your back and you did nothing to destroy your family and you have every single right to get out of your situation and to tell authorities about your situation. And again, I have to stress, please try to do it as safely as possible, which means maybe you do it at school. with a teacher. You go tell the teacher, and if the teacher doesn't listen, go to the guidance counselor, go to another teacher, because Alyssa did tell a teacher. She at 9 years old, she said, I'm having sex with my dad. And unfortunately, that teacher didn't listen. She didn't report it. She didn't believe it. So I do encourage you, if you see no action being taken, go to the next level. Go to the police yourself. If that means you go to the police station and say, I'm scared to go home, please don't make me. Um, do what you can to safely get out of the situation.
That's devastating. I can't believe that the teacher did nothing. That makes me sick, literally sick to my stomach. How did you find out that the teacher did nothing about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when I first. I can't recall when it first came up, but it's in an interview essentially in Alyssa's case record. They go back to this teacher, and the reason this teacher is significant and was interviewed is because this teacher was also dating our father. Right. So at that point,
Oh my God.
yeah, she becomes someone they want to interview, and they go back to her, and they of course ask, was there anything odd you can remember between Alyssa and her father? And she goes, yeah, well, this one time she came up to me and said, I'm having sex with my dad, but I didn't believe it. I kind of asked her further, and it seemed like it maybe wasn't true. So yeah, that's pretty much how I found out and can confirm the story.
Oh, oh my God. I'm sure that just like, I mean, you're already going through so much at this point in your life, and then you find that out. What was going through your head when all this was happening?
Oh my goodness. Well, when I, when I read those 3,000 pages or whatever, I was constantly blown away. And honestly, a lot of what I would do is I would take these direct quotes and put them on Twitter to kind of share my frustration.
Mm.
I would say something like, I can't believe I just found out this, and put the direct quote. I couldn't believe it. It was astounding. It was extremely painful and traumatic to learn all these things. I mean, the 3,000 pages is basically an anthology of Alyssa's life and her abuse. So it was extremely difficult to process. It still is. It's still a lot of this is, less than a year old to me and very, very
Mm.
fresh. So yeah, it's so difficult to see how many people knew about the abuse. Our father even called Child Protective Services and said, my daughter's going to call and lie and say she's being sexually abused. She called the police, or he called the police and said the same thing. So to know that all these agencies were aware is really terrifying to me, which is why, when you ask the question about kids suffering from abuse, I'm like, go to the next person if they don't listen.
Mhm. God, it's so frustrating, and I've never dealt with that firsthand. I mean, I was sexually assaulted when I was a kid by one of my best friends, and the same thing. A lot of people don't believe the victim, and it's heartbreaking, and it goes on more than people admit to. And with your sister's case, that just upsets me. Take me to the day when your father was taken away and arrested for the pipe bombs.
Oh my goodness, that is such a crazy day. At this point, I am the point person on Alyssa's case. I am the family contact, meaning I'm the person the police communicate with. And I had been for the past, year or so. So I'm 19 years old. I just turned 19. I'm in college. And the police call me and they say, hey, can you come down to the station? We want to talk to you about Alyssa. And I'm like, sure, I have a Spanish test. Am I going to be back in time? And, because you're in
Yeah.
college. And I'm
Yep.
like, they're like, yeah, no problem, kid. Come on down to the station. You'll be back in time for your Spanish test. I'm like, great. And of course I'm excited. I'm like, what if there's news? What if this is the break? Something happened. They never call me down here. This is so exciting. So I went in there really hopeful, and what they did was essentially sit me down, and it was 40 minutes of them telling me that my father was not who I thought he was, that he had been sexually abusing Alyssa, that, a lot of people had come forward to say that he had a daughter that I didn't know about, so I had this other sister out there that I had no idea about that he refused to acknowledge in kind of a horrible way. And just everything in between. And of course, they tell me this story of how all roads lead to our father being the perpetrator of Alyssa's disappearance. And then at the very end, they say, and because of all this, we're raiding your house right now. And your father's in custody. And, I actually play the 40 minutes or whatever of audio on the Voices for Justice podcast, and you can hear it in my voice. I just break. I immediately start crying. I'm immediately worried about my dogs, about him, about everything in between. But So I get out of this meeting and I literally rush home. I drive faster than you should ever drive or whatever. Because at this point, I'm like, I don't care. Like,
Hmm.
my world is upside down. Come for
Yeah.
me, whatever. So I get home, the block is filled with undercover police cars. I literally have to park at like the end of my block. And so I start walking, and I get to my house, and there's a crowd of, officers and agents and whatever, plain clothes, not plain clothes, in my driveway. And, it feels like they all look up in unison and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I live here. And they're like, okay, sit over there. You can't come in yet. And so, yeah, I'm sitting there just kind of waiting and wondering. And then they finally let me come in the house and I gather some things. There's some drama there. They like lose my dog. It's so really, really horrible
Oh my
day.
God.
Really horrible day. But whatever. I gather some things, and then I go to my brother's house with my dogs, and we're all sitting there watching the news, and we see that the entire neighborhood has been evacuated because they found 26 pipe bombs, and a bunch of guns, and yeah, and eventually we find out that they also find a manifesto, like a 96 or 98 page, I always forget the number, manifesto outlining how he was going to use these bombs to get revenge for, in his words, Alyssa's death from this organization that he believes killed her. So yeah, it's one of the most horrible days of my life. It was absolutely traumatic and terrible, especially learning those types of things from the news is really scary, and you don't know what to believe. So yeah, it was really hard, and I just remember missing my father. I had never been away from him, out of like phone call contact
Hmm.
for more than 24 hours. Outside of me being a rebellious teenager or whatever, but it was it was really,
Yeah.
really scary. And I remember when he called the house that night from prison, my brother answered the phone and he goes, and there's a lot of my family there. And they go, it's dad, hand it to Sarah. Like there was no question about who was going to talk to him first because they just knew that we were so close and so bonded. And yeah, like I said, it was just, it was one of the worst days of my life.
Where is he now?
Oh, he's a completely free man, still, I believe, in Phoenix, Arizona. I haven't spoken to him in quite some time. But last I heard, he was like, 10 minutes from my house.
Do you have a fear that you'll see him again?
Absolutely. It's extremely scary. I know that he's a very vengeful man. He holds grudges for a very long time. And of course, I am, the only one of his children that is extremely outspoken about this. And I'm pretty much spearheading, this movement to get justice for Alyssa, which includes, looking at him and getting him to talk because he's still never been interviewed by police. So if he were to go after anyone, I'm definitely one of those main targets.
How do you, at night, how do you sleep just knowing that? I mean, is there someone you confide in most about what you're going through?
Yeah, of course, I do have that person in my life that is my best friend that I can tell absolutely everything. They can come to my house and help me with security measures and things like that. But I'm not going to lie, when I hear a bump in the night, it's scary. I sleep with, multiple doors locked and all sorts of safety systems, and my dog's literally in my bed with me. And it's scary for sure.
Gosh. Has he tried to make any effort to contact you?
Not as far as I know. The last time we spoke was in June of 2019 when ABC 2020 asked if he would come back on the show. And so I reached out to him to ask that. And of course, he said no. I asked him to advocate for Alyssa, and he pretty much ended up hanging up on me.
Oh my God. Ugh. So, in your heart, I mean, I know the case is still an open missing person investigation. What do you, in your heart, believe? I know I hear connections about like twins and sisters. What do you believe in your heart?
I mean, it took me so many years to come to this conclusion, but I believe that our father had something to do with her disappearance. I believe that she was being abused for pretty much her entire life. And it came to the point where he was afraid that his reputation would be tarnished. She was going to turn 18. I fully believe that Alyssa was saving her money to move out the second she turned 18, and that she planned on taking me with her and then telling about the abuse. So I think that my father tried to stop that and killed her. I think it was his only way of doing that. And there's so many things that lead up to it that lead me to believe that. But yeah, in my heart, I believe that my father killed my sister.
I saw another one of your videos when he said basically he would tell you on his deathbed. How does that? Like, how does that make you feel just hearing that?
Awful and terrible, and as if he's a terrible person, and the thing is, like, people like to say, well, maybe he was joking and being sarcastic because look at, the meeting, and he could have just been upset or whatever, but that's not the only thing he said in that conversation. He said, come to the deathbed and I'll give you all the honest answers you want to hear, but he also said, I will agree to confess to everything if the state agrees to give me lethal injection within 10 days. So the fact that he said it twice leads me to believe that he wasn't being sarcastic. He wasn't just being a jerk. That he was just taunting me. He was just straight up taunting me. He knows what he did, and yeah. And I think when I was in that meeting and I heard that, I was like, this is what I need. Of course I'm recording it. Arizona is a one-party consent state, which he taught me. So jokes kind of on him. But yeah, like when I first heard it, I was like, I can't wait to give this to the police. This is everything we've been waiting for. Oh my gosh, like he says this twice. This is insane.
Mm.
He's finally answering questions. And the police are like, well, Sarah, he didn't confess to us. And I could have literally died in that moment. So yeah, it was extremely disheartening. I still think it's a pretty compelling piece of evidence. But yeah, for me to risk my life to speak with him because the police have never been able to then present this to police and them tell me, oh, well, it's not good enough. We can't use this in any way, really sucked. And it hurts. And I don't understand. And I'm, told by many other professionals that that's an outright lie, that they can absolutely use that in court.
Oh my God. So now, if the police were to, locate your father, can they just take him in for questioning, or is he hiding from them, or is he just free and not worried about it?
He's a free man. I have to assume that they know where he lives and have the capacity to find out where he lives. I don't think that he's in hiding of any sort, but I don't keep up with him, so I can't confirm that for sure. But yeah, they can basically get a subpoena to get him in front of a grand jury to speak. They have ways of legally making him be able to speak, and they have not done that at all. They just repeatedly ask him. I mean, they went as far as having the chief of police write him a letter when he was in prison asking him to speak, and that chief of police directly says something to the effect of, "I'm asking you to talk to us because I think that you have information that can solve this case." Um, so in one breath, I think that they did try. They've asked him many, many times. But yeah, you can get a subpoena to make him go in front of a grand jury and speak about these things, and they haven't, which I just don't get.
Do you think that by starting your podcast and doing interviews like this, do you think that the power of social media is almost going to force them to?
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe that. A huge reason of why I started the podcast is because the police did tell me we are going, they finally gave in. I had this horrible meeting with them in January of 2019 where, they say he didn't confess to us, Sarah. We need Alyssa here for statements. There's nothing we can do for you. We're not going to prosecute without a body or another witness, and we're also not going to look for that witness. We're also not going to look for that body. Just the most horrendous conversation. And I walk out of there saying, you know what? Good luck explaining this to Netflix, because that's where it's going to end up. Because that's just how, and I'd never spoken to police like that before. Like every other meeting, I was literally just like a puddle crying in their office, like begging them for help. And at this point, I felt that I was being lied to. And I kind of stood up for myself. And I'm like, okay, well, good luck. Good luck
Good for
explaining
you.
this to the world because everyone's going to know. And a week later, I get this email that says, okay, well, just kidding about everything we said in that meeting. We're going to go ahead and present this for prosecution. You'll know, and probably the police don't tell me this, but the state tells me, you'll know probably in 2 weeks our decision. 6 months go by. I don't hear anything. There's no movement. Nothing's happening. And I'm like, you know what? I need to push this to the next step. I've worked with so many amazing creators and I'm so grateful, but I need to make my own content. I need to tell this story in a way that no one has before, because of course they haven't. I'm her sister. I'm the one spearheading this movement. I want to tell it in excruciating detail, and that's exactly what I did. And yeah, I think that it has been a huge statement for them to see that I'm not going away. And a few months ago, they did kind of upgrade the police team a bunch of members just working on Alyssa's case in order to get everything the state was asking for in terms of all the evidence and paperwork and whatnot. So, but that didn't happen until just a few months ago. So I have to believe they saw the podcast gaining steam. They realized, we're at 18 months later after they said that they would present this for prosecution, and they just finished submitting everything to the state a few weeks ago. So I have to believe that the reason that they upped that team was because they're like, okay, this girl really is serious. She's not going away. My podcast starts getting in the top of the charts and stuff. I'm getting mentioned by, whoever. But yeah, I mean, when you have a podcast that is number 8 in the entire country of all podcasts on Apple Podcasts, and it's not just a single episode from Crime Junkie or from Morbid or Jensen and Hole's Murder Squad or whatever, which is all well and good, but it's literally the story of Alyssa by her sister is in the top 10 of Apple Podcasts. That's something you can't ignore. And that was the entire plan of the podcast, was here's something you can't ignore that is literally a retelling of mostly your case record. So, yeah, I think me starting the podcast was specifically designed to help Alyssa get justice. And I feel like it has been a part of that for sure.
Have you experienced any backlash from starting the podcast?
Absolutely. From a lot of people. Yeah. In my opinion, the police included, they do watch my social media very closely. They have sent tweets to people that have resulted in, me having to go to court. They have monitored my Instagram and commented on my Instagram. There's a TikTok video I made that says, the police have never interviewed my father. Here's my father saying, the quote about the deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of Alyssa's detectives jumped on my Instagram and said, for clarification, we asked your father, many times to interview. And I'm just so respectful. So I'm like, hi, Detective Anderson. Thank you so much for commenting. Like, yes, like, I'm sorry that just doesn't fit in a 1-minute TikTok video. You're absolutely right. If you'd like to clarify anything, I invite you to come tell your story on my podcast.
Good for you.
And of course he doesn't answer at all. But yeah, they are watching. They are not happy. I've been told that I'm ruffling feathers by putting these home videos out. But that's kind of what I have to do. Like, if anyone thinks this was plan A, that I wanted to give up my entire life to start this podcast, to do it after, a 10-hour workday, to then have another 8 hours of research and recording or whatever, like, that's crazy. This was not my plan A. I was not actively seeking media attention until they said, hey, we can't help you, get some media.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, the retaliation has been really not fun. The backlash is not fun, but it is what it is, and I will deal with it because Alyssa's worth it.
Definitely. I never met her, and just you have so much love for your sister, and it's very evident. So I know you're going to get justice for your sister because you're so dedicated and committed, and I'm rooting you on, and I hope that you get justice for your sister.
Thank you. That is really all I want.
My foundation has a rocket flight at the end of this year in 2022, and I'd be more than happy to send you a space badge. But I would love to send a picture of you and your sister, or any photos and memories that you have of her. I would love to include that. It'll go up into space, and then in 2022, we can put her picture on the moon. So everyone will have to look up at her always, and so you can always look up at the sky and know that your sister is looking right back down at you. So.
Oh my gosh, that is seriously like the nicest thing anybody has ever done. Thank you so much. So like, I have no words. I'm not good at accepting nice gestures, so forgive me.
That's okay.
That is extremely kind, and thank you. And I could cry right now. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Well,
be bold, be you, and be blatantly honest.